A new year ushered in with more bloodshed. By the beginning of 2005, Al-Qaeda and its allies had taken over the Sunni heartland of the country and were conducting brazen attacks against Shia communities, foreign troops, and anyone supporting them. Meanwhile, the US was pinning its hopes on the first elections, hailed as a milestone towards democracy and freedom. But as Iraqis prepared to vote for a transitional government, insurgents promised to turn the streets into rivers of blood. Little wonder then that some politicians had more on their minds than merely winning the mandate of their people.
We had to prepare for the elections, but I frankly never gave it time because I was focusing on security, on securing the country, on securing the elections.
Yet, despite the precarious security situation, on January 30th, millions of Iraqis braved the threat and headed to the polls.
I thought a lot of people will not go to the elections, but I saw them walking in streets. There were shooting at that time in my area, but they were not afraid. They were very happy, as if it is a festival, and groups of people are walking in the street and they are determined and even discussing with each other, this party is better than that, and why don't you choose this one? It was a happy day.
That the first post-invasion elections went off with almost no violence was seen in Washington as a confirmation that the plan to create democracy in Iraq was working. A bit of much-needed welcome news for the Bush administration. But an entire segment of the Iraqi population had boycotted these elections, clearly splitting the country even further along sectarian lines. Sunni hardline clerics and armed groups had warned of deadly consequences for anyone participating in the electoral process. As a result, voting stations in Sunni areas were almost completely deserted. In key towns like Fallujah and Ramadi, merely a handful of votes were cast. Once again, the bomb triumphed over the ballot box, and the opportunity for proper political representation in Iraq was lost.
It was a mistake, of course. It was the biggest mistake ever made. The Sunnis by this gave room for others to eat the whole cake. I believe they did not mean to boycott the government itself as much as the occupier. They believed any assistance would make the occupier stay longer. It was a mistake clear enough for a child to understand.
The Sunnis' electoral boycott ensured that power was delivered to the Shias and the Kurds. However, it would take 3 months of wrangling and negotiations just to agree on the makeup of a new transitional government. And once again, it was the Iraqi people who paid the price.
By holding the elections so early in the day, and trying to hold it at the middle of an insurgency as if it was going to be the weapon that defeated the insurgency, you were betraying all those Iraqis who had actually placed huge personal bravery and stake in the election campaign, in the attempt to create it. But it was this notion that, in other words, that the elections would be the solution, which was such a false hope.
In the meantime, Iraqis remained hostage to violence. Explosions, kidnappings, and murders had become daily occurrences. Old wounds grew deeper and new ones opened. Iraq was left to bleed, with no government at its helm. Meanwhile, the American government was the subject of global condemnation. In March 2005, worldwide protests marking the second anniversary of the invasion showed the US had little support for either its plan for Iraq or its war on terror. But the uproar fell on deaf ears in Washington.
Well, I think when people publish propaganda contrary to what's actually happening and use it as an opportunity to criticize the United States, obviously that's a problem. But the United States has to act in what it considers to be its national interest. It's the President's responsibility to protect America and its friends and allies. I don't even think the President of the United States should be affected by public opinion polls among American citizens, let alone public opinion polls among foreigners.
Yet, it was a matter of fact rather than opinion that the situation in Iraq was growing ever more dire. By April 2005, there were about 60 attacks per day, some killing more than 100 civilians at a time. Schools and universities, restaurants, bakeries, mosques, churches, weddings, and even funerals were all being hit.
Our life was packed with hardships. I just can't put it in words. We were not able to step outside of our houses. There were explosives everywhere, on the main roads and on the side roads, killing civilians with no mercy. There was continuous gun battles in urban areas. Only the innocent were killed. They were the victims. There was lawlessness. The situation went from bad to worse.
Plans for Iraq's economic transformation also lay in ruins. Strategic sites like oil pipelines, refineries, and power plants were continuously targeted, destroying what little was left from an already shattered infrastructure. And even the ability of American troops to move around was becoming compromised. Entire districts in Baghdad and Al-Anbar province, the so-called Sunni triangle, had become no-go zones for American soldiers.
It was too dangerous to take their fuel trucks and their ammunition vehicle along the main road. In other words, the insurgency had managed to force a way down between Fallujah and Baghdad into the western suburbs and towards the airport. And this became a seriously difficult area for American forces, probably for another 2 years after that. And that was quite worrying, that instead of just being a few people maneuvering about in the shadows in Baghdad and assassinating people, or creeping up with a car bomb and blowing it up, this was territory that was actually in the hands of an insurgency. And that was quite different.
In late April 2005, the US military and Iraqi forces launched Operation Lightning in Baghdad and south of the capital in another Sunni area branded as the Triangle of Death, a vital route that links Baghdad to the south of the country. Sunni groups were targeting Shias passing through the area and had taken total control of the farms and villages there. But the more soldiers descended upon towns and villages and barged into homes, the more the ranks of the insurgency swelled.
Anger starts from driving convoys on our roads to forcibly entering our homes, random assaults and arbitrary arrests. People got detained on false terrorism charges. If a man sees his brother killed or his wife humiliated, he will take revenge on the occupation army. And the only way to do so was to join the insurgency. The occupation forces provoked Iraqis in general and the people of Al-Anbar in particular.
There's a process of dehumanization of the enemy, because you cannot go in there with the attitude that this is a human being. His name is Muhammad, and he has 2 children and a wife, and he's a high school teacher, and I'm going to blanket fire, his house, and I'm going to kill everyone in it. It's really hard to deal with that when you humanize them. So it goes without saying that every time that we did that, we created enemies. And like I said, I cannot say that I blame them. I think that if somebody came into my home and arrested me, or arrested all the males in my house, that the children there and the women and whoever did not get arrested would hold a lot of resentment against the people who did that. Of course we were creating more enemies. Of course we were making a bad situation even worse.
Iraqis had no other choice but to turn to fighters and militiamen for protection. Al-Zarqawi's strategy was succeeding, and all-out civil war seemed inevitable.